Hello and welcome to the In the Moment magazine podcast. I'm Sarah Orme, the magazine's digital editor, and today I'm joined by Rachel de Thample, who is a food writer, chef and forager from London. She's worked in the kitchens of Marco Pierre White, Heston Blumenthal and Peter Gordon, and she's the author of Less Meat, More Veg, 5 and Tonics and Teas, which is out now in the UK. Today we're going to talk about how Rachel foraged and grew the ingredients for her very unusual Christmas dinner. So Rachel, how did this project come about?
So it was really a follow-on from my book, Less Meat, More Veg. The idea came after I'd finished it. I think sometimes when you finish a book, you feel you sort of mourn the loss of the intensity of the project and you crave something new to sink your teeth into. And as Less Meat, More Veg is obviously about reducing meat intake and focusing on more veg, but there's also a really strong message about connecting with your food and knowing more about where it came from. And I live in the city, I don't have my own garden, and I wanted to have a very hands-on food project. And so I decided, after I'd read loads and loads of books researching Less Meat, More Veg, and one of the books I read is Barbara Kingsolver's Animal Vegetable Miracle. And she is based in the States and moves from an urban area to the country and lives off the land, very river cottage style. And she basically, it follows her whole year of growing her own food. And I wanted to do something similar in an urban setting and to see how that would work in contrast. So I was going to grow a meal and I was thinking which meal would be good. And of course, Christmas dinner is kind of the perfect meal because this idea hatched at the end of one year. So I basically had a whole year to do the project, which is pretty much how much time you need to follow it through. I was very new to gardening. My grandfather is a very keen gardener and my mother as well, but I very foolishly never followed in their footsteps. And I am following in their footsteps now, but when I was a child and they would say, come out and garden with us, I was like, no, I want to read my magazine and listen to music and do all those things that children and teens want to do. I regret that now. So it was quite an intense first gardening project. I went to my local allotment and did a gardening course. And luckily, they were very kind and gave me a small patch of land on the allotment. So I kind of got a back door into the allotment. I got around the waiting list system. I set up a community garden in my local park and I did a garden share. And those were my sort of main plots of land to grow. And of course, I started growing stuff in my flat, in the window boxes, in my kitchen itself. I had tomatoes growing in pots next to my sofa. I still do actually try to grow. It's not as bad now because it's winter, but you usually do have pots of stuff everywhere. But that's really how it's the main way it started.
So did you find that January was a difficult time of year to start this project?
No, it was a really nice year. I think a lot of gardeners really love January because there's not a lot of active things you can do. So you basically sit on the sofa with endless mugs of tea and plot your plans, your gardening plans. So this is where it's all this beautiful dream and everything's going to go perfectly right. I think for most gardeners, it's like, this year I'm going to do this and that and this and that. And you have all these beautiful hopes and dreams. And then towards the end of the year, it usually typically spiral out of control. And you haven't gone on top of everything that you wanted to do. But January is the lovely time where you're plotting it all out. So that's where I was doing a lot of planning and making my wish list and going through seed catalogs and going to different seed fairs, like potato fairs and things like that.
Wow, I didn't know there was such a thing as a potato fair.
Oh, yeah, they're really good fun, actually.
So what kind of thing do they have there?
Well, they have every variety of potato you could dream of, and they have lots of seeds. A lot of people do seed saving, so they will be selling their seeds they've saved, or you get really amazing people who have all these heirloom seed varieties, so you can find 30 different varieties of chili. It makes it very hard for people like me who find too much choice and decision making quite difficult.
Okay, so how did you plan the meal? Did you sort of break it down into different parts?
To an extent, yeah. I went initially. The idea was quite traditional, so I thought I'm going to have Brussels sprouts, I'm going to have some red cabbage, going to grow some potatoes. And so I went that way, but actually the meal spiraled into something quite different and quite amazing. It actually I initially thought this actually could be the most dull Christmas dinner. Because what if nothing works, or I just thought there would be lots of crop failures and we'd end up just maybe with a couple of potatoes and half a cabbage. But what happened was I discovered loads of new ingredients, and the Christmas dinner actually contained probably 50% more ingredients than I normally would use. A lot of them I did, I don't know if it would be considered cheating, because I did kind of say I was going to grow a Christmas dinner, but I ended up getting into foraging. And that's really when I got into foraging, was through the Christmas dinner, because I gathered a lot of the ingredients as well. I mean, really the idea of it was a local and a hands-on. There was some sort of hands-on connection to everything that was on the table. I did cheat with the meat in the end. I looked into all sorts of options. Some I'm still kind of researching and trying to see if I can make them happen, because I live not too far from Streatham Common, which is a common piece of land where pigs and animals used to be grazed. So I've looked into, are there any areas? I know in Brixton, actually, there are people rearing pigs on urban plots of land. I think it's actually a local prison that they have pigs, and they've sort of really connected with the food cycle and some of the foods they eat there. But I ended up cheating on that bit, and I volunteered at Laverstoke Park in Hampshire, and I really love what Laverstoke do, and so I ended up volunteering there, and then I did order meat from there. But I did attempt snail farming and various other. You can also get certain types of crawfish that are the signal crawfish, that are an invasive American species that actually they actively encourage you to fish for. So that was one thing, but my attempts were unsuccessful in that area. So I did cheat with the meat, but everything else was completely, and rapeseed oil was the other cheat, because I had gone to a producer. I did try to press my own oil, but I didn't have enough seed to do it, and it's quite labor intensive. I think there's an episode in River Cottage where they're trying to do their own hemp seed oil, and it's then they go to good oil, I think, or there was definitely a program. But yeah, producing your own oil is quite a difficult thing. It's funny how and it makes you think, because we use oil so liberally in our diets, and if you know the process of it, you start to appreciate the amount you're using and think maybe I shouldn't use so much, because it's quite hard to produce.
Yeah. Okay, so could you sort of talk us through what you had with your turkey and what the accompaniments were and the different courses that you had?
Yeah, if I can remember all of them. We ended up having 2 meals. So we had quite an intimate family Christmas dinner, and it was more traditional. That actually, I think we had kind of 3 different occasions. So the first one, the main one was the Christmas dinner itself, and so we did get this beautiful 4-rib of beef from Laverstoke. It was rubbed with thyme that I'd grown and fennel seeds I'd foraged, and also there's a really lovely seed called Alexander's. So a lot of people know the spring shoots, and they liken it to asparagus. It has quite an aniseedy flavor. The seeds, they actually, I don't know where I put them. I gathered some the other day, actually. I was in Cornwall, and they were growing along the coast. But they have this kind of medieval flavor. They were actually planted by the Romans in Britain.
Wow.
And they have, I would say it's a cross between a clove and a black peppercorn and a star anise. So it's quite an interesting flavor, really complementary to beef. And then I'd ground some bay leaves, which I'd rubbed into the beef. And we had roast potatoes. I'd grown a lovely variety. Abel and Cole sell them as Rudolph. I think mine was a slightly different variety. It's the ultimate roasting potato. It's really, really fluffy in the middle, and then it goes outrageously crispy. And I had foraged some sumac. So I'd sort of rubbed the powder from the sumac. That's quite a labor-intensive process as well. So it makes you appreciate these pots of sumac you buy in the shops, because to produce a whole pot by hand is not an easy feat. So we had sumac and fennel seed, and I'd grown some really beautiful Hungarian hot wax chilies in my kitchen in front of the window. They did really, really well, luckily. And I had chopped them up and dehydrated them in a low temperature in the oven. So I made my own chili flakes. So the potatoes we had the fennel, sumac and chili on them, which were delicious. I braised red cabbage, and I ended up freezing it because the cabbage, that was a really hard thing to grow. I am not very good at growing cabbage. And I think I had 3 attempts at it because it kept getting eaten by the pigeons, and then would get eaten by the slugs, and the wind would knock it down. And so I think I had 5 plants. And I think maybe my third. So I learned that actually you have to have a few in the wings in case something happens to the one you have in the ground. So luckily I'd replanted it. And finally, after lots of netting and basically almost like stocking it, I had to like sit in front of this cabbage almost and protect it to get it to full size. And then I braised it. So I must have harvested it in October, November, and I braised it and froze it. But actually, last year I fermented my cabbage and I made with all the Christmas flavors. So for Abel and Cole, who I've written recipes for over the past 10 years, I did a mulled Christmas cabbage. And I did a very similar version of it, but I fermented it like sauerkraut last year. And had I really been into fermenting, then I should have fermented it rather than freezing.
Yeah, it's such a fashionable thing at the moment, fermenting.
Absolutely. But I did do, it's funny because a lot of the things I'm doing now were spurred from that dinner. So I really do a lot of foraging, and I'm teaching foraging classes now, and then preserving as well. My sort of really love for preserving kicked in when I had to do it for this meal, because it shows you the way we used to live, because you're growing stuff and then it's already October, September time, even November. And then if you want some food in December, January, February, even into March and April, you actually really need to preserve it, or you're importing it otherwise. That really got me into preserving. So we had this beautiful red cabbage. The more unusual things we had, I had another dinner. It was kind of a thank you to all the people who had helped me along the way. So it's the lady I shared the garden with. Another mild cheat was I'd gathered some grapes and I'd pressed my own grape juice, but I wasn't confident at that stage because it was such a steep learning curve. I was learning how to garden, I was learning how to forage, I was really getting my head around preserving, and winemaking was a step too far. So my friend and I I found some grapes from a local person. Actually, I think you find a lot of these things. I found a lot of people growing some foods I wanted for the dinner through social media, which is extraordinary, because I would put a post on Twitter, and I do it now. If I'm doing a project and I want local food, I will just put something on Twitter or Facebook, and literally within minutes I will have what I need, because there's all this food out there, and then most people just don't have the time or the knowledge to do something with it. And a lot of people don't even know what it is. Sometimes I'll call out for quince, and people send me a picture of something they have in their garden that they think might be quince, but they've never really been sure. And it's quite nice because then you're spreading that knowledge just by asking. And even by foraging, sometimes I'll have people walking past the hedgerow saying, "Are those rose hips? I thought they were, but I didn't know what they were. And what do you do with them?" And it's quite nice because you're almost doing kind of a free education just by the act of foraging. So we got these grapes, but I really wanted some wine because I quite like drinking wine, especially with a feast meal. And so a friend of mine had been producing wine with grapes he was growing on his allotment. So I invited him to the dinner in exchange for some wine. And I had some other people who were involved in the whole process. So we had this beautiful dinner. And one of my favorite things was I made this lovely tart with, I had some chestnuts I'd foraged, and I had dried some of them and used some of them to make flour. And I also met this incredible guy, Andy, from Brockwell Bake. He grows heritage wheat. So that was another cheat. There were quite a few. There were cheats, but then they had this hands-on story. So my friend Andy grew wheat. I grew some of the wheat, but I helped him harvest this massive field he had growing on a friend's biodynamic farm. And my son and I brought my son out. I think he missed school that day, but it was more educational. We harvested this wheat, and then we milled it, and I made this flour that we used with the chestnuts. And I had roasted chestnuts on top and oven-dried tomatoes and loads of foraged herbs that I'd gathered and grown. And we had this magnificent tart. And my friend who I did a garden share with was vegetarian, so this was a vegetarian feast. and I made this incredible salad it was the best salad I've ever had. And it's funny because it was all the things that didn't quite grow to full size. So I had these baby parsnips that were probably the size of my pinky. And I had these beautiful sort of Italian cabbages and chicory that I'd grown. And they were tiny, like Brussels sprout size, basically. And I shredded all these, and I had some hazelnuts I'd foraged. And so we had this magnificent salad of all the kind of baby vegetables and leaves I'd grown. I shredded some of the Brussels sprouts I'd grown into it. And it was this phenomenal winter salad we had with the meal. And then another thing I did was I had a drinks party. And I'm actually doing an event coming up inspired by this drinks party. But I'd foraged lots of hedgerow things, apples and blackberries, and wild cherries, plums. And when I do that, I end up with so much that it's quite hard to get the time to process all of it. And so I usually just shove them in a big jar and cover them in booze. So I covered them in whiskey or rum. I usually use whiskey because it's more local than rum. And I infused them. And then rather than wasting all that fruit, once I've strained it off, I chopped it up and I made a mince pie, and I used local honey, and I used elderberries instead of currants. I made these phenomenal mince pies, and then we had all the drinks as a drinks party. So it was another way of kind of saying thank you to people who were involved in the whole process. So that was really lovely. So I'm doing an event coming up, making these sort of foraged mince pies and tipples using local things.
Okay, so the next question. What are the more unusual ingredients that you used in your Christmas meal?
I think the more unusual things were some of the foraged spices. So the Alexanders, I used different varieties. I did grow a purple variety of potato as well. Actually, it's purple on the outside. When you cook it, it goes Smurf blue. It's quite fun. Let's see what else. I grew different colors and varieties of carrots. The carrots actually were probably one of my favorite things, and they still are my most exciting thing to harvest. It's so exciting, anything that grows under the ground and you're not quite sure what it's doing under there. When you pull it out and it has grown and it's straight, it's quite exciting and satisfying. I'm trying to think what else was more unusual. Well, I discovered a lot of uses for hedgerow things as well. So I made fruit leathers out of hawthorn berries and apples, which is really beautiful. And it's a lovely recipe that is purely local. So you have the local apples and hawthorns, and then I used just a drop of local honey to sweeten it. I used, what else? I made a beautiful cordial. So it's not unusual, but I think it's just unusual pairings. And I still do it, is when you have these seasons coming and going, and they kind of overlap for a moment. And one of my favorite things is cherries with elderflowers, because the elderflowers start to fade just as the wild cherries come in. So I made this beautiful cordial for my son with cherries and elderflowers, and that was one of my favorite things. And every year, this past year, I made pickles with elderflowers and wild cherries.
Wow.
And that was really, really popular. I did that for a Made in Hackney event where I had a wild food table, and that's definitely something I'll be repeating. But yeah, I think it's more sort of really utilizing local flavors and coming up with interesting pairings that aren't maybe as mainstream and as common, or different uses for things. Because I know hawthorn ketchup's very popular, but I wanted to do something that I didn't need to rely on other outside ingredients that I couldn't have grown. So I just simplified things, but made stuff that was quite exotic at the same time. And there were a few side projects that happened along the way as well, mostly to engage my son. He was a bit younger when I did it, and he helped me a lot on the allotment. And to keep him engaged, I encouraged him to set up, I think it might have been his idea actually, but he had a ketchup garden.
Wow.
So he grew different varieties of tomatoes. So it was a really beautiful color actually, because he had some yellow and orange tomatoes and red ones. And to spice it, so we used everything was local. So it was 100% sort of grown and gathered ketchup. And We grew some fennel fronds, and then we gathered some fennel seeds. He grew nasturtiums in place of sort of peppercorn, something to give it a bit of spice. And also we used the red nasturtium flowers to give it more a reddish color. And he grew his own garlic and onions. And what else did he put in it? We sweetened it with local honey. I think he grew some red peppers as well to put into it. And it was delicious. And now, to this day, he prefers, that was the benchmark for what ketchup should taste like. So it's quite nice, because Heinz isn't very nice to him, which is quite good, because it's really sweet in comparison. So he's used to flavors that aren't, quite as, they're more so naturally flavored and more sweetened with fruit and veg rather than lots of sugar. And he grew his own potatoes to go with it. So he had basically a chip and ketchup garden, which was quite sweet. And it's really got him into gardening. And he has a garden at his school. They have an edible playground. And he often gets asked to lead on different projects and to teach the younger kids, which really spurred out of this project as well. So there were so many side benefits to doing it.
Okay, so did you have to contend with any fussy eaters when you were preparing the meal?
Not overly. I think what was nice about it, and I think this is where the real difference in having a connection to your food is when there's a story behind something. Children or even adults who are less, adventurous are more willing to try something that has a really heartfelt labor of love story behind it. And it was funny because when I had this gathering feast after it was, so we had it on Boxing Day, we had all the friends over and had this feast. And when I was introducing the meal, I actually had to just stop because there were so many stories. I could have spent about 3 hours telling the whole story of the meal, but you can hardly say no. I think I would find it very hard to say no to eating anything that has that much love and that much time and effort and energy and passion put into it. So my son's always been an amazing eater. I've never had any problems really with him eating anything. And anytime I tell someone that I'll say, oh, he's not that big of a fan of aubergines, he'll say, yes, I am. He'll be quite defensive about it, and he'll almost make himself like it because he's always been championed as this good eater. But when his friends come over and I'm offering them things they're not used to, I think if you kind of spin a story to it, I always find they're more engaged and more willing to try something, at least try a bite of it. If you kind of tell a story and tell them which farmer grew it, or if you've had a hand in doing it. And a lot of my son's friends will come up to me and tell me what they've been eating or cooking because they know that I would be interested, or they want to sort of, get my approval from it. So I ran into my son's friend in the supermarket yesterday, and she was telling me all about the Sunday dinner they were doing. They were doing roast beef with roast potatoes, and she said she was helping and making the gravy. And so it's quite sweet. But yeah, I think when there's a story behind something, then it really engages people. And
oh, that sounds really lovely. So what kind of things could people try that are easy for them to make at home?
Easy to try at home. Carrots I grow often because I don't have my own garden. Every year we plant them at Easter. So my son does get chocolate around Easter, but he also gets a packet of Chantenay carrots. So they're the really small French variety, and we grow them in the window box. We grow radishes as well. And I pickled some radishes for the Christmas dinner as well, because they're really easy to grow in the window box. And beetroot was another thing we added, which I wouldn't normally have at Christmas. Although ironically, my granddad always grew beetroot, and my granny would always pickle it. And they would grow small baby ones and pickle them. And so I'd done my first version of my granny's pickled beets for that Christmas dinner as well. I started making my own vinegars as well. And so I've been teaching people how to make their own cider vinegar, because at this time of year, people are so overrun with local apples that a lot of them end up going to waste. And all you do, and it's something that's so easy to make, is you just chop them up, or even use your scraps of apples. If you're making a chutney or an apple pie and you're peeling the apples and you have the cores, I teach this on my river cottage courses in the autumn, because we are processing apples, and rather than just throwing out those scraps, I show them how to make the vinegar. And all you do is just pile them into a sterilized jar, and then you make some water solution sweetened with honey or sugar. And so I use honey for my Christmas dinner. And you use a ratio of 1 liter of water to 75 grams of honey or 100 grams of sugar. And then you can scale it up or down quite easily. And you cover your apples with that. And you cover it with a tea towel or a muslin cheesecloth, just a clean piece of fabric, basically, so it can get air into it. And in 2 weeks, you will have cider, which you can bottle or drink straight away. And then if you strain it and keep it in a clean container with a cloth over it again for another 3 to 4 weeks, you end up with vinegar. So that's a really easy thing people can do. I always encourage people to look at local spaces they have too. And if they don't have their own garden, they could a lot of funding's been cut, as most of us know, from all sorts of local services, including the maintenance of local parks. So if you go to your local park and find out who the authority is and who's looking after it, and you say you want to plant some apple trees or some hedges, or if you want to have a vegetable patch, it's quite likely they will say yes, which was my experience. And the best things to plant are things like trees. You have to wait a couple of years before you get the fruit. But the year that I started my Christmas dinner project, I went to my local park, and along with this community garden I set up, I just suggested planting more edible things in the park in general. And they got funding for an edible hedgerow, and it's about half a mile long. And they planted sloes, so blackthorns for sloes, and I think there's some crab apples, there's elder, there's rose hips, hawthorn, and now it's all those trees are fruiting, and it seemed like ages before they were going to sort of fruit and we would get anything from them. But time sadly goes by quite quickly, and you can reap the rewards sooner than you realize. But definitely, I think the sort of carrots, radishes, beetroot in the window box, making use of local apples or planting them are easy ways to go. And also, chilies are really easy to grow in a kitchen window, just in a small pot. And also, I sprout a lot of things, and even I grow wheatgrass, which is not something you want for Christmas dinner, but it's actually one of the easiest things. Pea shoots actually are probably more acceptable addition, and I did have some pea shoots in this magnificent salad I made for Christmas dinner. But you can do like small leaves and shoots, so you can even get coriander seeds you have in the cupboard. And I've done it. Some work and some don't. The organic varieties tend to work because they're not treated. But you can sprout those even at this time of year if you have them in a warm windowsill, especially if you have the radiators on in your house. The warmth from that and the sunlight coming through the window will sprout them in a couple of weeks. And then you have these lovely leaves. And it's just, when you have these quick projects, it's very encouraging, and it makes you want to take it a step further and do something that's more adventurous.
Oh, okay. I think we probably better wrap it up there. So where can people follow you on social media?
The best place is Instagram. So I'm at De Thample, and I'm also on Twitter, Facebook as well. I post some of my events, but Instagram I always have all my sort of latest events, and you can see some of the things I'm foraging and some of the things I'm cooking and preserving.
Oh, that's really lovely. So thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. And for those of you listening, you can find some of Rachel's tips and ideas on our blog if you want to find out a bit more about urban foraging. Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks.
If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, we'd really appreciate it if you could rate it and also leave a review. And we'd really love to hear your feedback as well, so please get in touch with us. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at In The Moment Magazine. Or if you prefer, you can drop us an email. Our email address is calmmoment@immediate.co.uk. We look forward to hearing from you.